Hi, I'm Owen Stevens. I'm an addiction counsellor and a cognitive behavioural therapist, also program leader of the PCI College uh, MSc in addiction counselling and psychotherapy, and former president of the college. I'm joined today by a graduate of our Masters in Addiction program, Frank Byrne. So you're very welcome, Frank, and thanks for joining me.
Thanks very much, John. Yeah, good to see you again.
So what we're going to just talk a bit about is just, in relation to the program and what difference it hopefully has made for you and what you got out of it, just so that people can get a bit of a flavour of that. And, in particular, I suppose the sort of, if you like, broad question we're addressing in our chat is, why would anyone specialize, and what value is there in specializing, and what need is there out there for people, for counselors specialized in the field of addiction? Because obviously that's what
yeah, well, I must say, just of all, just a little bit about myself. Like, I work, I suppose, on the preventative end of addiction. That I work in counseling and coaching for people within organizations, and I've encountered people grappling with addictions of one sort or another, but more or less keeping the show on the road, but probably dabbling with drink, cocaine, and increasingly gambling.
Okay.
Things, but mostly those things. And I have found that this course has given me a depth and of both knowledge of the dimensions of the subject itself, but also exposure to and practice in quite a lot of methodologies in the ways in which treatments can be applied. It also gave me, and this I suppose was to some extent surprising, but definitely beneficial, it gave me an awareness that there isn't a one best answer, and this is not a kind of one size fits all. And for, if you like, a mature or practicing student, that is both a challenge and an opportunity. And that I found that I needed to, on the one hand, be open to the fact that a patient, a client, that what they're presenting with, that I needed to take the time to kind of access that and to have a sufficient repertoire of approaches to do justice to the client, not to do a one fix or an easy fix or something I put in, here's someone I prepared earlier. Now, that in turn required from me to have a self-assuredness, not an arrogance or being cocky or anything like that, but just being quietly confident that to do justice to the patient and to have respect for him or her, that I could explore the thing, explore their situation collaboratively, and explore things with them, and at times perhaps being supportive to them, at times being a little bit challenging to them at the appropriate pace. And this course gave me exposure to the repertoire of possibilities there. Kind of, if I can, I just go for another bit, just in case I forget to say this. I think part of learning showed me that in many of the approaches that there are, and there are different approaches, a common thread is what they call kind of therapist factors, which meant that that part of the learning on a course like this should be, and is, and was for me, me learning about myself, so that the parallel features in the design of the course of engaging in personal counseling and therapy to ensure and explore my own integration and capacity to provide a safe place for and for patients is through the personal therapy, but also through the teaching methods used of role plays, class discussion, case studies, all of that. There was, while much of that teaching and learning was content or subject based, a lot of it was student based, so that like people like yourself and other lecturers were helping me to learn about me, so that I could then in turn bring that self-awareness to any therapeutic contexts for the benefit of the patient. Now, that I suppose might have seen it on a brochure or whatever promotional material beforehand, but it turned out to be extremely beneficial, not only in professional practice, but also as personal development in my own life's journey. And that, like for anybody, I suppose, is always a golden opportunity, really.
Yeah, and you know, as you mentioned, you know, we had some good discussions and, you know, mildly heated arguments, uh, and a good bit of fun along the way. You know, it is. It is. You know, I'm glad you're describing that part of it, because that is part of, I think, you know, what's needed in a complex field like addiction.
Sure.
And you're working in that field now, and I'd be interested to hear a bit more about your work. But also third level education, you know, third level education is about discussion.
Yeah, that exploration of partnership, like this is a master's level, and it was presented as such. Certainly our frontiers of knowledge were certainly expanded, and new stuff was brought to us, if you like. But the challenge and the opportunity was to integrate that into our existing practice and experience. And very often the learning methods and took the form, as you've just said, of debate, discussion, exploration. Not so much with shaping all of our thinking towards what is the one right answer, but rather to make us comfortable with and aware of the complexity of the challenges and the repertoire of solutions that sometimes competed. And that part of the challenge was intellectually to be comfortable with coexisting and not always compatible approaches, so that the repertoire that a person, that each of us as a practitioner could subsequently bring to a clinical situation would be rich enough to find a solution to match the uniqueness of each individual kind. Yeah, sure, some of those debates were good crack, and to be honest, you're right. Well, I should also say that you know, while the whole journey was sometimes challenging, especially in the middle of January, going off somewhere for early morning clinical placement. Overall, it took the form of a collaboration, a partnership between the college lecturers and any individual student, but also between the students themselves. And we found ourselves breaking into small groups and having informal contact with each other outside of class times. And I suppose when you're doing a part-time course, which is nonetheless a substantial part-time course, that kind of team support from your mates on the course and fellow students is really helpful at times. And we did have kind of good debates. Some people had strong enough professional views on one approach is, if you like, more prominent or more valuable than others. But generally the spirit was of openness and challenge to each other in exploring each other's boundaries and thinking with a view to enriching everybody's, I suppose, resources in the end. Yeah, that was good. Yeah. And
you've touched into the sort of study work life balance challenge there. Is there anything that you would add to that, just for people who are considering doing the
yeah, I have, as it happens in my working world to date, I've had some broad connections with adult learning. I feel like post-experience learning or in-service learning, all that stuff. And while people throw out sometimes casually the idea of lifelong learning, it turns out that it's actually true. And keeping, without getting, I don't know how far you can push the analogy, but for me, like keeping the child alive in us, so the childlikeness, keeping a sense of exploration and newness and learning, is kind of, it's both a privilege, but it's something that we can lose sight of if we get just dragged into the sameness, the routineness, the familiarity of day to day. And so we kind of have to push against the grain to make a window of time for new structured formal learning. But it is incredibly worthwhile. But not just for the content or the subject matter or the skills we learn, but just from having in your adult life the experience of re-engaging with learning and the whole sense of finding newness, exploration, discovery, and accepting that it's really okay to explore stuff that despite your age and stage in your life and career, that you can still learn. I would say that because of the commitments and demands that people have generally in life and work these days, there's never a good time. And if people wait to find, I'll do this course, this is a very interesting course, it's on a subject area that is clearly very relevant and very needy, if you like, in our society now. and with the intensity of careers and work and pace of life, and that will probably all get going again after COVID, it has never been more necessary. But nonetheless, despite appreciating that, we still have to make the effort to carve out the time. And there will be times for somebody who does this course when they will wonder, oh, how did I get involved in this? Because it can seem a bit demanding at times. When that happens, our experience was, and we talked about it with fellow students, people tend to pull each other through. And once we decide at the start of the course that this is worth doing, then people, if you like, honor themselves by saying, yes, I'm going to get through this, I'm going to get there. And in addition to the learning of methods and subject knowledge and skills and all of that and approaches and the extent of the field, there is also the personal development of demonstrating to yourself that you're still up for it, that you can still kind of learn and that you can still enjoy a collaborative journey. And while we all in the class learn shared experiences, similar content, because it's master's level and we bring different stuff to the party, we're also each learning different things. There has to be a commonality of learning so that the award of a master's degree has to mean something in a shared learning. But the style in which it's delivered also ensures that there's individual personal learning in professionally, but also people learning about and from themselves, from each other.
And we're offering the course obviously as one which will equip or further equip people to work with that huge need that's out there to help people struggling with addictions. So that's what you're doing. Would you tell us a bit more about your work and how you feel equipped to do that?
Sure. So, my background is work. I worked for a while in clinical psychology with children, and then I got more involved in organizational psychology and subsequently with training, coaching, with the movement of positive psychology, which, without being too simplistic about it, is a rigorous application of opportunities for development that builds on people's strengths. There's nothing fluffy about it. It's simply, the ideology is about identifying what's right with you, what do you do well, and how can you build on that, rather than what's wrong with you and how can we fix it. Not in a naive way, not exclusively, but that's a large part. So I tend to work with individuals and groups and organizations combining what we call appreciative inquiry, again, looking for the good. It's a kind of a philosophy approach to things. Emotional intelligence as opposed to the intellectual, rational, deductive model that tended to dominate education in the past. Appreciative inquiry, emotional intelligence, and positive psychology. And we have found that while the main thrust of my work was about helping people to be in the fullest sense they can be fulfilled, doing good stuff while in various enterprises from public, private, voluntary sectors. The pressures and stresses of that, whatever it may mean, everything from health, from business challenges, deadlines, pace, competitiveness, sometimes financial challenges at home, has induced a lot of people to lean on crutches that are not healthy, and everything from the traditional drink, traditional as in the sense of mainline part of our culture, and then more recently into cocaine, gambling, where the financial pressures often starts where financial pressures are difficult, where people can feel, well, maybe you'll just have a quick kill here, but then turns into something else. Those things, all of those creeping poisons are at play in the client groups with which we work. And as I said earlier, my role is more about the preventative side of things, helping people to identify that they have emerging, growing, insidiously often problems, and helping them to build coping mechanisms before the difficulty gets too far, before it induces a dysfunctional effect in their life.
Always worth doing, yeah.
So now, at the same time, and because of this course, I had invites back to work with people who are already in the grip of addictions of various sorts, if you like, in the addiction center in which I did a placement. And that has been also instructive and helpful. Apart from it was gratifying for me to be able to be helpful to people in that situation, but it also enabled me to articulate with confidence to people who are in the, if you like, pre-problem phase with addiction, what the consequences would look like, in that it gave me an intimacy with people in the group of addiction, where the viciousness of the grip that they can be in, where they're trying to tackle their own problem, even with the best tool in the world, to realize that the kit they're using, the equipment they're using, is a flawed brain. And so that getting out of that can be quite difficult. Anyway, it's just helpful to work in populations where we can broadly educate and alert people in an informed way to be wary of the seduction of addiction, if you like. Yeah, so that has been kind of really helpful to me. It's there in the class I met people who work mainline full time, if you like, with people who unfortunately whose lives have been derailed by addiction. And in talking with my classmates who are more in that situation, I have found that the course gave them a deeper and broader, and both of those things matter. Deeper in any one approach or in the whole area of the specialism, and broader in being able to embrace the differentness of approaches in origins and in why it is, and this remains a challenging mystery for practitioners in the field, why it is that certain approaches work, appear to work, and work enduringly for some patients with addiction, and others apparently not. But rather than get disillusioned by that, this course tended to embed in people and in practitioners, in us as practitioners, the confidence and the resilience to keep going in the face of such obstacles and such inconsistent evidence in the field. You know.
Yeah, you could sum it up by saying it's complicated, I suppose.
Yeah. I wouldn't be good enough to say something as succinct as that.
But endlessly interesting. I mean,
Yes.
I think that I've worked for a long time in various aspects of the addiction field, and it is complicated and hard work, but immensely rewarding. People get helped, and it's wonderfully rewarding.
Yeah, I found, and it's interesting, like what I alluded earlier to in the field I work, that a lot of people's careers induces them to lose their sense of intrinsic self-worth, and to find that to tend to equate their value with what they have achieved, either in monetary terms or career title or whatever it might be, and partly lapsing, if you like, into addiction can be an attempt to re-find that sense of self-control, self-worth, self-mastery. And to be able to help them to do that is truly a privilege. Our work in this whole area of addiction is generally helping people to re-find the well-being, the enjoyment, the peace that they were, if you like, born to experience. Now, all stuff happens after we are born. People can't control it. But the whole area of addiction is a kind of complicated set of seductive practices that ultimately betray people, and under the guise of helping them in some way, takes away from them and steals from them that sense of self-worth and dignity and peaceful enjoyment of life. And I find that a role in working in addiction is to help them to re-find that. And unquestionably, this course helped me to be able to feel equipped to implement that privilege of intervening and being invited into the lives of other people who are struggling.
Yeah, very interesting. That's a kind of a discussion we could go deeper into, but we won't right now. Sure. Maybe just to close this for now, this very interesting discussion. Thanks, Frank. Maybe just given the times that are in it, any thoughts on how this pandemic that we've been going through and that we're still going through, how that may influence the work of people who try and help people?
I think it's probably going to work in both ways. One kind of plus and one perhaps minus. Where it induced a lot of uncertainty, and where people were struggling, in particular, we found this in our work with relationships at home. In the past 3 months or so, people who were perhaps having difficulty in relationships for one reason or another, everything from emotional, personality fit, perhaps financial, whatever. They've been kind of thrown together, and the tensions in that have increased, and at times induced people to rely even more than they might on unhelpful kind of mood altering stuff. And it wasn't an accident that the supermarkets reported that the sale of alcohol was beyond Christmas week in the first week or two of this COVID-19 thing.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, and our experience is that some people in this kind of category have been wanting to get back to work because the structure of their routine, of their daily routine, meant that they did not have to be in such claustrophobic contact with people if the relationship was a bit challenged. Now, on the other hand, that, if you like, is a negative or a challenging consequence of these things.
Yeah, I think so.
And there's quite another cohort of people who are reporting that because of technology and the nature of the jobs, they were able to continue to add value to their work to a sufficient level while getting more personal time back, spending a bit more time with family, with children. And many people reporting in the populations that I and my colleagues work with, not having to commute long distances, having to commute, and this one is interesting, on an uncertain and unpredictable duration each day. Give them a sense of control. And some people reported guilty having to deciding that they'll stop working at 4 o'clock until was pointed out to them that they were going to spend half 2 hours in the car anyway. So they were actually entitled to stop working at 4 o'clock or whatever the time may be. So what am I saying? I'm saying it seems to be that this COVID thing is having two effects. One negative, that depending on the life stage quality and challenges with which people went into the COVID, those things could have been accentuated, which in turn makes them more likely to lean on addictive behaviors and substances. On the other hand, where people were more or less have their lives in what we might call an equilibrium, it tended to enrich and deepen their experience, the better side of that, by giving them more autonomy, more control, and more personal family time. And that cohort are realizing that perhaps we could kind of perpetuate this beyond COVID time. And we do know that some of our corporate clients are looking at ways in which they might, for example, have, just to pick a number, perhaps 60, 70% of people on the premises on site at any given time, but not the same 60% all through the week. So that people might have 2 days more on average at home than they did have while working at home, but perhaps working 10 to 4 because of productivity. So it's a mixed kind of picture.
Yeah, but I think that positive point is probably a good one to end on, not just because it's positive, but also because, to my mind, it's a common theme in all the different theoretical and practical approaches to addiction. It's a common theme that the alternative to addiction and the horror of that is real connection with other people.
Sure.
It's really recovery.
Yeah, sure. And just as you said, as we get towards the end, well, I said earlier that different approaches, different techniques, different philosophies or understandings of addiction have their place. And indeed, I suppose the best kit bag to bring to the idea is one that embraces all of those and has a place and a skill of how to use them. Because of that sense of connection, one of the course's, if you like, findings, but my own personal journey, and I found it also to be the case for fellow students because we talked offline with each other and our experience of the whole thing, was that connection with ourselves. And the sense of, in this case, just to mention one particular approach is Paul Gilbert's compassionate focus therapy. That whole area of compassion and appreciation, tying in with that whole positive psychology and appreciative inquiry of look for the good, not again in a fluffy kind of magazine way, but that sense of connection, groundedness, and belongingness and integration for both intrapersonally and between ourselves. gave a sense of community of practice from which each of us felt that we could then go confidently, again, quietly, confidently, with a sense of assurance and privilege to enter, be invited into the world of an addict who is comparatively struggling, and to be able to be helpful there.
Great. So you'd encourage people to give it a try?
Absolutely, and I would once again say there is no good time to do any kind of substantive course. It's both an opportunity and a challenge, but to be honest, sometimes when I look back on it, I wonder how the hell did I find the time to do that? But I'd also have to say, to be honest, that I miss it to the point that I'm actually wondering about doing something else, even at this tender stage of my life.
Yes, addiction to doing courses is a
no, that might be a new addiction.
Yeah,
to put
exactly.
into the classification.